Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. It's time for our show with Ricky Williams, which is Intersections of Race and Astrology. Um, and we are here with a special guest today, Jay-Z Zoldak, or just Jay-Z, sorry, who will be our moderator and question asker. So anyway, Jay-Z, take it away.
All right. Uh, I got a list of questions that I have written on this screen, so I'll be referring to them and then we'll just flow through it. So, Ricky, Andy, are you ready to be grilled?
I'm ready.
Dude, I would say I wore my grill, but that wouldn't be culturally appropriate. I'm not going to say that.
It would be cultural appropriation, is what it would be.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Wait, white people aren't allowed to wear a grill? Jeez. Dude, are you allowed to cook on the grill?
I'm not allowed to do anything. Everything. I mean, most things for us culturally appropriated. So we're
Oh
good.
man. All
all
right.
right. Well, let's get right into it. All right, and I have this entitled Questions for Intersection of Race and Astrology Hosts. All right. So first off, my first question has to do with kind of historical or collective patterns that you might see in astrology, because you guys are, both advanced astrologers, right? So my first question is, are there any specific planetary alignments or transits that you have noticed? So I'm not really sure if you're into horary or if I think that's what they call it, horary. I don't know. Mundane, maybe astrology. That you associate with like major cultural shifts that you've seen with race, equity, social justice, like Black Lives Matter, civil rights movements. Have you looked into those events and seen any patterns?
Ricky, do you want to go first or?
No, you want you to go first.
Well, okay. Well, okay, so I'm not an expert in mundane astrology, which is what it's called. And the reason it's called mundane, it's from the Latin word mundo, which means earth or the world. So it's like the world, the astrology of the world. So I'm not a specialist in history or any of these things, but one of the things I can say is that Black Lives Matter was so interesting because I think the day that it's Martin Luther King Day is when the sun is at 28 Capricorn. And we should fact check me on that, but I think that every day it's on that 20th degree of Capricorn, and the Black Lives Matter happened when Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter were on 28 Capricorn. So then I think it makes me think of all these people who are really into Martin Luther King Day. They must have planets at that a late degree of Capricorn. So every year they get a transit to their chart when they are on that day. And then when all the planets piled up at that end game, they were really active and they came out with Black Lives Matter. So I think of that as like a collective synastry development at late Capricorn. And Capricorn is actually the color of dark castor brown, which most African American people have dark castor brown skin, actually. And it's funny because they say Black Lives Matter, but it's almost like they were saying like dark brown people matter. You know what I mean? Like black people matter, right? And so it's like from a eyes and coloring perspective, that degree of Capricorn is the color of African American skin, which I think is beautiful. It's like people who have those planets at that end degree see and care for that subset of culture and are kind of meant to be attuned to it. So that's kind of how I think of it, but I'm not a historian.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating because it overlaps with. We talked about this briefly, but the idea of holiday to subsist, to keep on going, that there has to be something energetically holding it to that time period. And that's a wonderful example in MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. being a Capricorn, in that in this country, most of the country allows themselves to take a day off to celebrate his birthday, which is fascinating if you think about it. All right, Jay Z. To answer your question, it's funny when you started. Uh, I'm not an expert in mundane astrology, but I am a Gemini. No. Um, so I probably know a little bit, just enough to get myself in trouble. So when I heard your question, the thing that popped into my mind was it depends, because when we have a major transit going on, it's energy that's available to us. But in order to do something with the energy, you have to have humans that are taking action in the world. An example that comes to mind is the Cultural Revolution that occurred across the globe in the mid 60s. And it's every time I do a reading for someone born in the mid 60s, the Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo, I always use the 60s, and I say what was going on in the 60s, right, is going on inside of you all the time. And we saw a lot of shifts in the civil rights movement because the energy was available. Uranus, Pluto. The energy was available, but there needed to be people that were taking action to utilize it and create the changes. And there's always going to be people, but when we talk about people in this context, we're talking about groups of people, because mundane astrology is the astrology of what's going on in the world, but the cells that are activating those large events, right, are us. And I think this is the importance of being aware of what these major aspects of slower moving planets, when they're coming, and each of us starting to think about and meditate on how can we utilize this energy to create massive change in the world. Because whoever did utilize these energies has been the ones who've written history. The massive changes that have occurred with these major oppositions, conjunctions, etc., of slower moving planets.
Oh, that's interesting. I that's interesting about, like, to bring it to a personal level and also the collective level. And I hear what you're saying, Andy, also about how the way that the sun goes around the dial, like on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, like that's more of a thing about maybe that color, and so not equity, like gender equity or, other kinds of equities, but specifically racial equity for Black people.
It seems to
Huh.
me that it's almost like when, you know, Black people took back the night from all the isms kind of getting all lumped together, and they're just like, no. And Black Lives Matter. They took it back to like, let's talk about color for a second. Let's rise it to the surface and say this freaking matters. So I like that's true, because maybe in the 60s there was more equality for everyone. I mean, I'm not really an expert at this, so I feel like I'm stepping out by even saying anything, but I think the 60s were a big equalizing. I mean, it was like the hippie generation and, kind of thing. I wonder if there was different equality fights, like the Neptune and Libras probably fought for gender equality, a lot of that with like feminism, but there could have been also people working for equality between, cultural equality, and then the Pluto and Libras. I mean, Ricky, do you think that Pluto and Libras are fighting for equality of cultural equality?
Oh, when you say equality, what I hear is universal homeostasis. I hear something closer to that, where to me, we can talk about Libra and the scales and harmonizing, but to me, this idea of harmony is something that's inherent in everything. It's always there. And so, going back to the 60s, the way I understand Pluto's role when it moves through a sign, right? Is Pluto's role is to bring things that are swept under the rug, that are buried, to bring those things up to the surface so that they can be healed and they can be processed. And this happens in our individual lives, right? Pluto comes along and, right, things that I knew I was bearing or things I didn't know I was bearing somehow get activated, and I get the opportunity to wrestle with them. Oftentimes I'm like, this is too much, and I try to stuff it back down. Not too often, but the idea of the nature of Pluto bringing things up to the surface. And so if we're applying it to mundane, right, one of the things of Pluto moving through Virgo in the 60s is bullshit shame. Bullshit shame. Like a Virgo who's really in it and they're beating themselves up, right? Some of the things they're beating themselves up for, yeah, they can get better, but some of it is things that they inherited from their parents that they should be doing that they really shouldn't be doing. So they're beating themselves up for no reasons. Bullshit shame. And I think what we saw in the 60s is bullshit shame for being homosexual, bullshit shame for being African American, bullshit, right? All of these things that people were being shamed for, right? There was an opportunity as they came up to the surface, and Uranus was there to look at it differently and do something. And the people that were willing to identified with that and were willing to claim that kind of independence, the larger result of them doing that helped bring more about equality. But again, I think that's something that's always, because until things are like this, we ain't going anywhere. You know, until we have sex, right? The two opposites harmonizing, right? That's what creates a child. So we're not going anywhere. So I think this urge towards harmony, equality, balance is something that's driving everything. And these activations are opportunities for us to seize the day and facilitate that process.
Interesting. That's a good
and I
one.
think people that have powerful placements I think people that have powerful to answer your question, Andy, people that have powerful placements in Libra, they have more of a focus in harmonizing whatever planets are there, bringing that to fore in the world.
Interesting.
Well, there's also the Libra thing of one-on-one relationships too. So it could also be a reimagining, like, of that maybe all relationships, personal relationships, aren't between, a man and a woman, right?
Yeah, there's
well, maybe. But if I'm applying the same idea of Pluto moves through a sign and it brings buried stuff up to the surface, right? One thing to think about when Pluto moved into Libra, right? And divorce has always been around, but we saw Pluto moved into Libra, we saw the divorce rate go through the roof, right? And they weren't pretty divorces. Pluto and Libra generation, I saw my mom chasing my stepmom around the table with a knife, it's like these two people that were married and supposed to love each other, and now they're trying to kill each other. And again, divorce isn't new, but we saw an intensification of the process, right? And where did that come from? Right? So much, Andy, we've talked about this. So much of relationships for the past forever, has been about survival. So if it's really Ma needs Pa and Pa needs Ma, right? Then it makes sense. If there's something we can't agree upon, sweep that under the rug so that we can survive. That was necessary. But we get into the 60s and 70s and we get psychology, right? We get depth psychology. We can start looking under, and there's more equality. And then it's like, I'm not dealing with this shit, right? Because it's not about survival anymore. So long of this certain pattern of, in order to get along, we have to sweep things under the rug. Right? I think that's what came to head. That's one of the things that came to head when Pluto moved into Libra. And I think the Pluto and Libra generation, and for us, it's really wrestling with this idea of how can I have a long-term commitment to someone and actually be real and be honest. So there's an intent. So I say, when I'm talking about Libra, I say the tendency of Libra, it's an air sign. And air signs are lighter, right? And so Libra tends to be on its own, and not in a negative way, just more superficial, right? Because if I'm talking to someone and I keep the conversation light, it's easy to have harmony. As the conversation goes deeper, religion, politics, right, sex, as it goes deeper and deeper, it becomes more challenging to maintain that harmony and that balance. So a lot of people aren't motivated to do it. Pluto and Libra, I feel like we can't help it, right? We can't help it.
Well, in some ways, racism is relational, right? Because it's like, it's showing like, where are we if we take, two different cultures and we, like you and I, Ricky, are forming a relationship. We have Pluto and Libras, and we're like intensely trying to co-create this show without breaking up, essentially, right? But it's like, it is relational what we're doing, and it requires a relationship to even talk about the topic. And we approach it as like, we have a good composite chart because we're kind of astro extremists, and we're saying our energy will carry us through this experience that could be actually quite deep. We're going political, basically, right? But it's like, I mean, how much is race relations relational? I mean, racism doesn't even exist if there's not a relationship going on, right? Like, racism doesn't exist. If you're alone in the woods, like if they say if you clap in the woods and no one's there to hear you, like does it really happen? Like if you're alone in the woods, like is there racism?
Well, I mean, to me, if I understand the roots of American racism, it actually makes sense. It actually makes sense. Okay. You bring millions of Africans, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but primitive, and again, I don't mean that their capacities were primitive. I just meant like they were closer to nature, so they didn't have to develop certain other things, right? And so you bring millions of them to this country, right, under the pretense that they're going to be property and we're going to own them and it's going to be like that forever. And then things change and you have 5 million, okay, 90% of them illiterate, okay, people that are very different than everyone else, different color. And so back then, they truly believed that Africans, right, were closer to monkeys and that they were less intelligent. Right? That's the science they were creating at the time. And so, unless you're a scientist and questioning all of this, then you just accept it as what it is. And so you're in a country, you're forced to deal with all of these people that are so different, and a lot of these people we've been trained are inferior to us. And then with Reformation, a little history here, not Reformation, sorry, with Reconstruction, right? They were given political ability to run for political office. And so, and in the South, what rose up is white supremacy. And it was really to maintain the order of life that they've been created for a couple of hundred years. And so I talked about this, and so it created something called the Negro problem. And so the origin of our existence in this country, it brings up a lot of complicated questions. And they're relational, but and this is Libra, in order to have a Libra relationship, you have to have equal partners, right? This is why we keep going to equality. And so this idea of Black Lives Matters, it's powerful because there's pictures from not less than 100 years ago, less than 80 years ago, of white people, right, posing and smiling, right, where they have lynched Black people right behind them, right, smiling. They were proud to be there. And right, and then fast forward, we see an African American being abused that way, and people see it and realize it's real. To me, it's a wonderful thing. They realize that this isn't okay. And I don't think we've had any kind of powerful moments like that where as a country, we got together and we made a statement that said, this is not okay anymore. Because for a long time, it was okay.
Well, isn't it interesting how you have to keep chipping away at an issue, and people who are non-astrologers are always wanting peace on Earth and all this stuff, and I'm like, well, there's too many transits for peace on Earth. It's like it comes in waves. It's like, oh, now we're gonna take a real good look at everything, and then it goes away. And like, why are people not chipping away at it right now? The transits are not there. We are not ripe to do that right now. It is not time for that right now. So it's like I just think that racism, like you told me in episode 1, like we're beyond racism, Andy, and I was just like, well, right now we're having, like Uranus and Taurus trine Pluto, or no, I mean that we're in a trine, or like it's sextile Neptune. Oh, well, yeah, the Pluto is trine the Uranus right now. Like basically people are not up to racism talks right now because the planets are in this nice configuration. And I think when they go into a peak point, again, people will surface, like you're saying with Pluto. It's like it bubbles up to the surface, and then we got to attack racism again. Like, I don't think we should ever stop making sure and checking people on racism.
It's going to be interesting with Pluto moving through Aquarius, because based on my thesis about Pluto brings buried things to the surface, and back to George Floyd, Pluto in Capricorn, the patriarchy, right? And slavery existed under the patriarchy, where it was okay to lynch, I won't say it, to lynch a Black person, right? To do all these things to them, right? And part of the shadow is, again, America never talked about that, right? That comes up. And again, I'm driving down the street and I see an old white lady with the sign waving at me and says, Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, cool, right? Cool. Now, right, one sign moves into the next, we get kind of a backlash, okay? Because part of the thing of exposing the shadow of the patriarchy, we have the woke movement, okay? Pluto moves into Aquarius, we're starting to see the shadow of the woke movement, right? And I'd say probably the woke capital in our country, LA, Pluto in Aquarius, Mars activates that Pluto. Okay, the rich woke folks are getting pissed off. Okay, right? We're stuff burned. We can see what's underneath. Right, this is kicking off Pluto in Aquarius. We're gonna start to see a backlash, at least in the beginning. Right, again, to get to the bottom of stuff so that we can heal, we can process it and move through. And the thing about peace, and I had a teacher, he said, you get peace when you die, right? When there's a perfect balance and equilibrium, okay, life stops, right? Life stops. So to me, it's not about peace. I'm a football player, right? We're not about peace. It's like, let's enjoy the game, right? Let's do our job.
That's why I'm at. I'm here for the freaking Spartan match. Well, Jay-Z, you asked two Geminis a question, and 20 minutes later.
Well, my next question goes to what you were saying, Ricky. So you need like the astrological conditions of the time and the transit, and then you need the people to make the things happen. So what kind of astrological placements or planets or aspects are there that'll appear in the charts of people who make those things happen as activists, as cultural leaders, as, people that change society? What have you
Oh,
seen?
great question. Great question. So like to go to the foundation of my answer is if I'm talking to someone, a lot of people come to see me and they say, I want to know my purpose. What are my purpose? Well, and I say the way you know what you were made for is by learning what you were made of. Right? And all of us are comprised of a certain amount of planetary energies. And I say planetary energies because to me, the planets are what do all the work, right? That's where the energy is. So if we need innovative new ideas, right, we need to break the mold. The people that have the powerful Uranus, that's in their chart. That's what they're going to be called to do, right? The people that are needed to point out truths that are buried under the surface that everyone can't see, right? Those are the Plutonian people. So when we understand what we are made for, right, and the transit comes or the progression comes, quite literally, we hear the call. What do we do about it? Have we been trained to quiet it? Have we been trained that we're powerless? Have we been trained that it doesn't matter what we do anyway? If so, wasted opportunities. That's why someone knowing their makeup, knowing what's strong in them, following the transits, it makes it easier to hear the call and do something with it. I'll give an example of personal astrology. All right. I get later in my career, Neptune squares my sun. Neptune squares my sun from Pisces. And I'm still at the very end of my football career. I have another year to go on my contract, but I hear the call, right? It's time to let this go, right? Everything you've needed to get from this experience, right, for your spiritual development, you've gotten. It's time to let it go and do something else. Right? All the voices on the outside, you have a short opportunity to make all this money and you're not going to be anyone anymore. You better stay and play as long as you can. Right? But because I knew my chart, I could hear, it was easy to hear the call and to trust it. But even this kind of tuning, right? To me, it's a religious sense. Or even the idea of hearing the call. Most people will say, hearing the call from what? But growing up Christian and in the Bible and hearing all the stories about the people that heard the call and the ones that listened, things went well, right? The ones that didn't, things didn't go so well, right? It made it easier for me to recognize and hear the call and act on it.
Interesting. I'm wondering, Ricky, because you were able to so you knew your chart at this time that that it was like a Neptune sun thing, or you look back at it later and saw oh, wait a minute, that's foreshadowing a shift.
I knew my chart then, and I was wrestling, should I play or should I not? I looked and I saw that Neptune square the sun. It was like the desire to play left. It was gone because it wasn't real. It wasn't real. Neptune, right? It was a glamour. And so just that awareness allowed me to make a connection and to be able to tell what is real, right? what can I trust to act on? There's infinite possibilities out there, right? At least that's what we're told, but life shows us actually there's a certain path that is meant, a certain at least general path, right? That if we stay close, right, we're good, and if we get off, right, we get nudged back on the path. And it's just a sensitivity to be able to, one, believe that that exists, but two, the awareness to be able to hear the voice and to act accordingly.
All right. And did you tell people that that's why you're like, well, I gotta go because Neptune square my sun, and they're like, oh, okay.
Well, I mean, no, of course not, right? But to me, I'm the astrologer, right? And as I talk to people about astrology, I have to do some interpretation, right? So I'd say, right, I would say something like, right, this is exactly what I told my coach. Okay, it's beautiful, right? I said, Coach, I've been going back and forth thinking about playing or not. Right? I had a dream and I saw myself doing something else. Exactly what I said to him. Okay, that's a Neptune transit.
Oh yeah, interesting. It's funny, like when is it that you admit that like, oh, it's because of this other reason that you're not going to believe in, and when is it that you make up some other thing? I don't know.
I don't know though.
I
I don't think it's made up. It's the same. It's a translation, right? Because when we say Neptune, right, our interaction with
Mhm,
understanding what Neptune is what we saw in a book. But how did it
mhm,
get in the book, right? How did it get in the book from people's observations, and then they translated it into astrology, and so I'm just translating it back into real life experience.
mhm,
Right? Our lives, right? Our lives don't exist. They don't come. The astrology, the Neptune aspect, it doesn't come from what I read in a book. It comes from the shared acknowledgement of an observation, an outer observation that corresponds with an inner observation. Because, right, daydream in a Neptunian time, you're daydreaming more, right? So you have more access to the images and the information that can only come on that frequency. So to me it's more useful, right? Because that's what Neptune is, right? It's a dream, right? My imagination has come over me, and I'm imagining myself doing other things. That's the same thing as saying a Neptune transit.
I'm all answering from a producer's perspective. I'm like, well, it depends on if it was in brand for him to say it was a transit at that time, because was he an astrologer yet? And like I'm just being a producer.
But this is an important, this isn't, to me, this is the most important conversation that people that are interested in astrology need to have. Because so much of the time it's easy to use astrology as an escape or as an excuse, right? But to me, it's more better used as a tuning mechanism, right? It's just validation. It's like when you're talking to a good astrologer and there's a thought that you had in the back of your mind and you thought was crazy and there's no way you'll ever do it. And the astrologer says, hey, it would be a good idea to do it. And you're just like, right? The person who's having that experience of wow, they don't know what the planet is, right? But the astrologer was able to use the symbols to translate it into English to something that's really meaningful and connected someone to their own internal experience.
Yeah, I think the question of when do we use an astrological excuse or explanation for our behavior, that's a big one. Jay-Z, I don't know if you remember that time we were running that question on the Facebook page because we were talking about how people won't let astrologers use transits as an excuse. Like I was in a Mars transit and they were like, well, what are, so then we kept asking the crowd, we're like, well, what are non-astrological excuses like PMS? Like there's all these things I was hangry, like people use all kinds of explanations for hard behaviors all the time. And we were making the fight that we should also be able to add in the astrological transit as an explanation, just like someone saying they have PMS. Like,
I'm
I
anti-excuse. I'm just anti-excuse across the board. I think
me
maybe
too. I'm
that's
a toughen up cupcake kind of person. That's what Jesse and I say.
well, right. It's like if we go back in time and a planter, a farmer is out planting seeds in the spring, right? And his kid walks out and he says, "Why are you planting seeds right now?" The farmer would say, "Because it's springtime. It's time to plant seeds." Right? He doesn't say the sun is approached Aries. So
Yeah.
I know that when the sun gets to Cancer and then it gets to Virgo, we'll be able to harvest what we plant in Aries. Right? And and I think we've been so disconnected from nature. And I think astrology, especially in the Aquarian age, is a gift and our ability to reconnect to nature through our modern minds, because it's at the root of it. It's based on observation, acute observation of celestial objects. And I was outside last night just looking at that beautiful moon, right? And there's Jupiter, right? And I imagine if every day that was my job to know what was going on and then what was going on in the world, that's what we do as astrologers.
GZ, can I go back to the activist question?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think of course like Ricky was saying, we're looking at the study of individuality. So each activist is a different person, a different chart, right? Like, how a person works their activism. Are they a guerrilla? Are they in your face? What does that activism look like? Depends on the chart. And though I would like to mention a generation of race equity activists, which was the people who have like 4 planets in Capricorn and that Pluto in Scorpio. That generation, anti-patriarchy, anti-capitalist, anti-racism, like they went beyond, not being racist to anti-racist, like anti-racist action. Like, and I had several of them in my class at the school at Portland School of Astrology, and they were tough students. I mean, they grilled me about racism. That's actually one of the reasons that we started the show, was to fight there was a lot of racism talk at the Portland School of Astrology because one of the other professors had written her thesis on racism in pagan communities. And so they kept talking about racism at the school, which is just not my specialty, right? Like, I specialize in the astrological layer, but so anyway, that particular generation is very, very pivotal, or is going to be pivotal in race equity, I think. That's all.
I just had a crazy idea.
Talk to me.
What's that?
I just had a crazy idea. I was thinking about racism. I was thinking about racism, especially in our country. And I saw this image of, 2 girls playing, a white girl and a black girl, and their friend, and then the black girl does something to piss off the white girl and she calls her the N-word. Is that when things were going well, right, there was no racism. When things went bad, right, the racism came out right away. And this idea of going back to the idea of why I'm against excuses, because obviously I'm a religious person, right? And I truly believe, and astrology supports me, is that everything happens for a reason. And to a certain extent, right, our perspective on what that reason is going to have a lot to do with how we handle the situation. Right. But in a situation where there's never anyone to blame for anything, how can racism exist?
Can I say something? Can I build on that? Okay, actually, please. Ricky, you're talking about like kind of my concept for this show was, well, as an astrological extremist, I'm trying to show that astrology beats a lot of things. Like, so if you have a good composite chart between two, or synastries between an African person and a white person, there will be this magical ability to get along. Like you and I have a magical ability to get along, right? Well, and it's like, and we both have hard Marses and we have Mars square each other, but like our composite chart is bomb. Okay. So what I am really trying to prove in some ways is that if people work to good energetic alchemies, if we arrange our marriages, our interracial friendships to the correct calculations, like this will fight racism. Because we don't really have racism between you and us because we're friends. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, but you're right. As soon as there was a conflict.
We're not in competition. We're not in competition. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But if I started doing something weird, like let's say I talked over you the whole episode and I wouldn't let you talk, you might be like, that chick is racist. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or like if you talked over
I say that cracker doesn't shut up the whole time. I say that Karen didn't shut up the whole time. But that's what happens, right? We get pissed off and we reach for whatever we can find, right? And gender and race, the otherness is the easiest thing to grab. But I'm just thinking about this idea. If I didn't have anyone to blame for my problems, right? Racism wouldn't have any use for me, wouldn't have any good for me. Right? It just would put me in a bad mood. So
The cracker
But
talk too
and
much.
it's of course, right? I do I do this kind of astrology. You know, you get these gnarly charts. It's funny, I get these gnarly charts, and afterwards, when I'm done, right, I get a comment like, "Wow, you really are a very positive, optimistic person." You know? Because when I see anything, right, I'm always looking at what is the purpose of this. What taught me God don't make junk, right? And if you have a lot of gnarly ass, it's because you need to do something gnarly, right? Let's get to it, right? And let's not make you the enemy. Let's make all the training you received that makes you think you're not supposed to do something gnarly. That's my attitude, at least.
No, but actually,
Well,
Rick, I do want to elucidate that you're making a really good point, and I want to make sure people hear you. That Ricky is saying that racism comes out when there is a conflict or a challenge or a competition. People start pulling at racist ideas to not explain the conflict, but that's when, like, if we have peace between people of different races, we don't really have racism, right? Like, I just think that's a really astute point. That's all.
right. And maybe this is getting back to that Facebook thread, Andy. Like it would be that, there was some Jupiter Mars thing on your Mercury and that's why it couldn't shut up. And so Ricky would realize like, oh, it's just Andy having a Jupiter Mars thing on her Mercury. It's not because of like any other reason.
Yeah, but see, I
Or
would
even
Is
remediate
that
my
an
Jupiter,
excuse?
Mars, Mercury.
But that's what I'm
That's
saying. That's my point. I
yes.
would have higher expectations. I would say, right, you need to do something with that. You need to do something with that Uranus Mars, right?
I agree. I'm
That's
not.
Yeah.
skillfulness, right? Right. It's like you go to school, right? A Mars transit. You go to school, and the bully is attracted to you, right? You can say, why'd you get beat up? I had a Mars transit. What? Right? A bully came at me, and I needed to stand up for myself. Because if I'm talking to someone about a Mars transit, I might say Mars, but I'm saying bullies are showing up in your life, and you need to stand up for yourself.
Well, usually this comes out of that time
Right?
in.
And I would say from this is but my type of astrology, sorry, my type of astrology, evolutionary astrology, like we have an answer built in that why are you having the Mars transit now, right? Because it's time for you, right? It's time for you to toughen up. And in order, when it's time for you to why do we plant the seeds in spring? When it's time for you to toughen up, experiences are going to come that give you the opportunity to toughen up. I was talking to this woman, like super strong Mars. And we started talking, and I started talking about bullies, and she started nodding her head and talking about her abusive husbands. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, this is the story. You see it in the movies where it's the woman and she gets attacked and she gets beat up. And then she decides, I'm going to go take a martial arts class and get a gun and defend myself. And then the guy comes back and then she kicks his ass, right? That's a movie, but you see a woman, an older woman, especially with a really powerful Mars. It's interesting how often some version of that story shows up.
Yeah, well, I think when people are trained in remediation, they become spiritual masters. Like
Helper?
astrologers who know how to wield their energies and don't use them as an excuse are, yeah, spiritual masters. But if before that you're just kind of a spiritual baby, I'm like, oh, you want a bottle? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Well said.
Hmm.
Well said. Did it help her?
I'm like, you tiny cracker. No.
Yeah, exactly. This is
What are
fun.
you, an oyster cracker?
A goldfish.
That's like a tiny Pisces baby.
Pisces cracker. Yeah. My wife's she's a cracker and she's a Pisces. I'm just gonna throw goldfish at her today.
Oh, you love crackers. You got a bowl full of crackers.
I sure do. Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I really am wondering, like, because Andy, you're a remediation artist, right? And so you are trying to help your clients, heal from their trauma or reclaim pride or whatever it is that you can do, right? By suggesting, like, know your chart, know your transits. So that's why, Ricky, I was asking because you brought up a specific example, not to be like, well, did it help her? Like, I'm just like curious. if you've seen in your experience being able to uh counsel people and them really understand and take it forward.
I have something
You
to say.
know,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well,
Yeah,
okay,
I
so
think the way
it just made me think of.
I wouldn't call what I sorry, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
have no. I'm not allowed to call Ricky names because I'm in the oppressor group.
Exactly. Yep. And I can call you all the names I want. It's so great.
Go ahead, Ricky.
Okay, I'm saying, yeah, I wouldn't call what I do counseling as much as it's really storytelling. Because we create our memories and we create our identity based off the stories we tell ourselves. And most of the options we get for stories to tell ourselves suck. You know, they don't align with our chart at least. And so for me, I just tell stories that help people move their stories closer to what the chart is indicating. And so it allowed her to reframe and give a new perspective on experiences that have shaped who she is. And when you do that, people get to reshape who they are. You know, when I first started doing readings, I had this naive idea, this image that people were like clay, you know, and that if you could get them to connect to the chart, right, they could reconnect to the clay and they could turn it into something else. But in real life, I realized that people are like clay, but it's like cooked, you know. So until you can get it back to the soft state, they can't do anything with it. And I find that allowing them to reframe the stories, right, allows them to go back to the raw materials of the energies that brought these experiences about and to reshape them. And it does change people.
I believe Ricky does really help people. In fact, I'm starting to refer big dudes who don't know their charts who have problem behaviors to Ricky. I'm like, yeah, real men know astrology. Go talk to Ricky Williams. Like, um, I do have a story though, Jay-Z, about something that intersects with race and astrology and kind of what you're asking. I had a client, and this was years ago when I was just, I didn't have the language that I have now after having worked with Ricky for so long. But like I was on the right track, which he was a big African American client, and he had Mars in Leo rising square something, and he would get really violent, actually. You know, like he was a rapper, very well-known rapper, and he was super martial, right? And so I remember talking to him about how as an African male, you can't necessarily Mars safely because culture is so oppressive. I'm like, I mean, I was like just talking to him about how like if you go in a Mars transit and you're intimidating energetically, that's when, you get put in the back of a car or like, that is one of the oppressive things about, our culture is like black men getting pulled over way more than white men and things like that. And like a white dude can have a Mars transit and like the cops aren't gonna like descend upon him like locusts and like step on his head and you know what I'm saying? So like I remember, really being in that case, the intersections of race and astrology were really helpful in being able to actually weave a story like Ricky's saying that would might actually help that person just know their power and know the effect that they're having on the world around them. And because like I just didn't want him to get hurt because he was hard Marsing and like someone was intimidated by him. And so like I remember at that time we were like prescribing him on Mars transits to get more tattoos, to ride his motorcycle more. Like, I was trying to give him outlets that were safe and also martial, but that's just one example that where I do think I was able to help fill theoretically. Like, do I know, did I talk to him years later and say, like, did that help? I don't know. I think checking back with our clients would be a good idea. But I do think people are philosophically and
Yeah.
theoretically helped by remediation 100%. Like even trying, it would be like just going to your counselor help you. I mean, hopefully even them trying helps, but I don't know if that answered your
Well, I
question.
think help is relative. The kind of, at least my experience, the kind of change that at least that I see for people, it's a process, right? It's a process, and I think it helps in the sense of that we are contributing to that process. Right? But if we contribute a decent amount, but in someone's personal environment, right, they have things contributing to the old way, right? The help is there, but it would probably be, pretty much voided relatively soon. Something you said, Andy, that really jumped out to me was this idea of oppression, being oppressive. And also, I'd like to have this be about race, gender in astrology, because if we look at this example of the history of African Americans in this country, and the most important thing for the safety of the slave owners was to oppress the Mars and the slaves. It's the most important thing, right? Otherwise, there's no slavery. So if we look at what is really oppressed in all forms of oppression, this race, gender, it really is the expression of the planet. And we can make a human, a moralistic, play about oppression is bad, but from a spiritual perspective, right? The planet will not be oppressed. They will find a way to express themselves in one way or the other. But the oppression makes their expression distorted, twisted, more difficult to own, more difficult to become skillful with. So for me, the oppression of the astrological potential in an individual, that's the true crime. And it's a spiritual crime. Right. And that's why when we get caught up in someone's external experience and not really curious about what are the deeper forces meant to emerge through this individual, man. So the whole isms based on someone's external self, right? It just blinds us to that there's something inside that's much more potent in long term than what we see on the outside.
Oh my God, you dropped another one. Okay, well, I want to quote Ricky and be like, the oppression of astrological influences in people is the true crime. Because I'm actually I'm writing an article right now for the Organization of Professional Astrologers on astrology and bipolarism. And I'm basically talking about how bipolar people are oppressed by psychotherapists because they are told, you are just in a mania, calm down. And I'm like, never waste a mania. Like, you could be using that for mega expression. Like, so I actually have a section in the article that's called repressionism versus expressionism. And like, basically,
Yes.
I'm trying to get people to be able to express their manias one transit at a time. And like, that is deep.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is beautiful.
Are we behaving?
All right. Who are
Behaving
you
well
asking?
enough for you? I guess I was assuming that Jay-Z behaves, which he does not.
Um, well, all right. How are we doing on time, Andy?
We have 8 minutes.
All right, we got 8 minutes. Well, okay, so my next question has to do with, all right, again, like, so you're suggesting things. I love the way that you said reframing, Ricky. I think that's awesome because I think that's been the most helpful for me in my life of a way of always moving forward or seeing that I'm always moving forward is constantly reframing things. And I'm wondering if like there are like certain um patterns that you've seen of like skepticism where people don't have that ability, and if you can tie that back to and like are there is it, Andy, you're always saying there are a bunch of things that contribute, like your astrological chart plus culture, climate, something else. Like, what is it that allows people, or is it their charts, patterns in their charts, to reframe and progress or not?
So I can't say that it's patterns. I can't even say it's anything in the chart. What I can say, it's the individual 100% of the time, because a chart can show accurately, in my opinion, how easy or difficult something is going to be. Basically, that's what it shows. right? And if we think of someone develops in a certain area, if certain things are easier, they're right in front of us, it's easier to develop in that way. When I say easier, I don't mean good or bad. I mean, it might be easier to talk back, right? It might be easier to smack someone than to have a conversation. If your Mars is really strong and your Mercury is weak, when you get frustrated, it's easy to smack someone than try to explain yourself. So you're going to see person with the strong Mars and the weak Mercury, right? The pattern is established. But if they have a parent that's willing to work their ass off and helping the child do something about it, oh, right, then it requires more effort, but the pattern develops differently. And so, another way I say is the skepticism. I would say, and I'm being rigid, skepticism would always come from Saturn. And back to what I was saying earlier, some people have easier access to Saturn than others, right? People that doubt everything, no, it can't be true, it can't be true. Because to me, Saturn is the question where we ask ourselves, is it worth it? You know, I was in one of my classes, this Capricorn Saturn guy showed up, and I could tell the whole time he was wrestling. Is it worth it to invest my time and energy in studying this? Right? That's the only question he had in his mind. And so it made him come off as being skeptical. But the part of us that is responsible for telling us whether something is worth it or not, and whether we can handle it or not, that's Saturn. Right? And people have different relationships with Saturn. Some people have to work harder to overcome that skepticism, but that's not a bad thing, right? Because if they work harder to overcome it, they know they got something. People that don't have any skepticism, okay, right? So it's about understanding yourself, what's needed in the situation, and whether it's easy for you or difficult. And if it's difficult, work harder and get some help, right? And if it's easier, don't take it for granted, right? Honestly, astrology to me is, in a way, is that simple. If you understand where something comes from, then you know what to do with it.
I could listen to this guy talk all day.
Well, Andy, what do you think? What's your kind of riff
I,
on this?
I really want to answer it from the astrological layer. Well, I mean, I do think the cultural layer has a lot to do with it. Like what kind of household you grow up in teaches you negativistic thinking or more positive core thinking. But of course, our chart, in some ways, the chart kicks ass of everything around it in some ways. I do think some charts have negative narratives, like Mercury Saturn conjunction people can be very negative. I dated someone with Mercury Saturn for 3 years, and like everything turned into this like, well, I shouldn't call anyone out on air, but that was a
Of course you
tough
should.
relationship.
You're calling out
Okay.
the aspect, not the person. Okay.
That's true. Yeah, but that one was just like, woe is me, like everything, letting people label them, letting people stifle them with ideas, constantly letting the idea, like letting the ideas stop them from manifestation. But like if somebody has like a Mercury Uranus conjunction, or opposition or something, like Ricky has that, like innovative, constantly finding a new way out of things. Like if there is an oppression, they'll think their way right out of it. Mercury Jupiter people, very optimistic, very positive core. So I think certain Mercuries are better at optimistic thinking and reframing than others. And that's, if you have a Mercury that doesn't reframe very easily, find a friend with a Mercury that does. It's like outsourced.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Ricky, I didn't realize that I also have a Mercury Uranus opposition. And I also, as I'm a big fan, I've been listening to your episodes. I was hearing when you were having talking about having conversations with AI about astrology, and I think that's probably a thing with that too. I do I know a bit about AI as well, and yeah, so I was hearing what you were saying about like teaching AI and then learning from it by having it kind of come to he's seeing hearing what conclusions it comes from and how it drops context after a while and like what the ways that you do to get around that. And I think it'd be really interesting to have more conversations about that, about like prompt engineering. Are you familiar with the term, Andy or Ricky, prompt engineering?
Jay-Z
I
is
am.
another
Yeah.
computer programmer, so he's
Oh,
the hacker.
That is awesome.
Yeah. He
Uh,
he wins hackathons, basically. So,
Oh yeah.
uh,
yeah, but we
anyway,
we should definitely do an episode on that. JT, how many questions did you end up left with?
we I think maybe we got to less than half of the
Okay, I'd love
questions.
to have you back on the show because you were a great moderator and your questions were really great. So maybe we can have you in a month or so. But well, thank you both. This has been a wonderful hour, if you ask me.
All
Wow.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that flew by.
Man, the two crackers made Ricky laugh. Did you see that? All right, you guys. I will
Yeah.
see you soon.
All right. Talk
Thank
to you
you.
later.
Bye.